Good afternoon, knife nerds. Today we are taking a look at my Sharp by Design Evo Typhoon. This is the 2021 version, designed by Brian Nadeau of Knife Nuts Podcast and manufactured by Riot in China. And this is a very highly sought after knife, as you all well probably know. If you're not new to the game, this one is a banger, and everybody is always looking to pick these up. It's not super easy to acquire on the aftermarket, and you will probably pay a little extra to get a hold of one, which I did do. And but it did shake one loose in the Reddit knife swap group, and I was able to pick this up. And so it is used. It's going to have a few snail trails on it, but I don't mind it so much on this knife. I will be carrying and using it, so a few little scratches here and there, no concern to me. That being said, let's get some specs on it and talk about the aesthetics first. It is 8.375 inches overall length. The blade is 3.75 inches, and it is M390 steel, and the weight of the knife is around 4.55 ounces. So I really like the weight on this knife. It's the way it's distributed, it's very well balanced in hand. It feels super good to me. So as you can see, with my large medium size hand, it's a very good fit. Plenty of handle to get a hold of, plenty of blade there. Not too big, not too small. It's exactly the right size. They do have a micro version of this, which is a little bit shorter, and I don't really care for the smaller version very much. To me, this knife is the perfect size, so I'm not even really sure why the micro version exists, to be honest with you. I'd rather see more of these produced than what we have available to us, rather than micros and full sizes and micros and full sizes and various drops. I'd rather see just a lot more full sizes produced, but I guess some people like the micros, so what are you going to do? It is what it is. Aesthetically, we have this beautiful harpoon swedged tanto tip with a bead blasted fuller, and the primary bevel here is hollow ground with a belt satin finish, and that belt satin is also on the flat ground tanto tip here and on the harpoon swedge. The flats of the blade are hand rubbed satin finish, so you get a little bit of contrast there. 3 different finishes. You've got your bead blast, your belt satin, and your hand rubbed satin all on that blade, so that's pretty cool, having 3 different finishes there. And as we flip it over, all we're going to see is the Brian Nadeau logo here on the flipper tab, and that is the only branding on the knife, which is awesome. I really do like a good sterile looking blade, and Brian Nadeau's logo is quite attractive, and so no problems there. The blade steel is not indicated on the blade. There's no M390 badge, and I'm perfectly okay with that. We don't have to see what steel it is on every single knife, so no problems there. This handle is giving me a sort of a muscle car vibe to it. The way that the scales are contoured, as you can see, they are fully contoured and completely rounded at all of the edges, and the way that this sort of sloping cone pivot collar comes up a little bit above the scales to meet up with this sort of 6-shooter cylinder looking pivot. It all just screams muscle car language to me, which I think is completely sick. And so on the scale, on the back side, we have this pocket clip, which is sort of leaf shaped at the tip area, and it has a sort of Scotch-Brite satin finish on it, which is very cool. I like this type of finish on a clip because the clip is going to take all of the wear as you walk around with this in your pocket. As you can see, I've already got scratches working on mine, but that's no problem, because with this finish I can just pull that clip off of there and, you know, sand it with some sandpaper, just wet sand the scratches away, and then finish it with a Scotch-Brite pad, and it's going to look almost exactly like the factory finish all over again. So it's a maintenance friendly finish is what I'm going to say. I'm the type of guy where I like to tinker with my knives, and I don't mind, you know, refinishing this pocket clip once in a while. So to me, this is a perfect finish for a pocket clip. Absolutely love that. On the spine of the knife, there is no backspacer. It's just kind of an open construction, and we do have that, you know, very functional jimping that is on the spine of the blade in the exact correct place at the exact correct size, and it is quite functional. It gives good traction without being rough. So they nailed the jimping here, absolutely. There is a sort of a hidden lanyard attachment point here in the butt of the knife, along with just some aesthetic milling jimping here on the back. And it is a bolster lock style with those marbled carbon fiber inlays, or in this case shredded carbon fiber inlays. And so you have that shredded carbon fiber inlay covering about 75% of the lock bar, which is great for you know, functionality, because it's going to keep your fingers off of the lock bar when you're flipping the knife. So, you know, my fingers are going to rest back here and not touch that lock bar at all. So that's pretty cool. It sort of acts like a liner lock, where your fingers are not going to interfere with the lock. So always love a good bolster lock. When the blade is closed, this knife is also quite attractive, with most of the blade tucking away into the handle, and that beautiful harpoon standing proud there. Just a great looking knife. It's not doing a whole lot that is particularly fancy in today's market. You know, it's a rather plain, functional EDC knife. Aside from this obviously very wickedly ground, sick blade that Brian Nadeau came up with and executed absolutely beautifully. And so yeah, as far as the aesthetics, not particularly fancy, which is great. It's a good user knife, but beautiful all the same. You know, it's doing everything correctly. Just, you know, good aesthetics, good functionality, good action, good quality build construction. It's hitting all the marks rather than some of the marks. Like so many knives, you'll have this, you know, oh, this is great, this is great, this is great, but this part sucks. That's not happening here. This, you know, everything is just executed pretty good on the Sharp by Design Evo Typhoon. Before I move on to the action, there is one thing that was not executed great here, and that's the carbon fiber. So I'm going to try and get in here, and you can see that there is really a lot of voids. There's a big one here, and there are several up here, but then there are all these micro fine voids in this whole area that just kind of causes the carbon fiber to look really rough. If I step away from it, it just looks rough in this whole area because there are so many voids. And that's something that I'm really not used to seeing from Riot. I've owned a lot of Riot knives over the years with carbon fiber on them, and 9 times out of 10 they just absolutely nail the finish on the carbon fiber. And I don't think I've ever actually had a Riot that had voids in the carbon fiber until this came along, and there are a lot of voids right on the show side scale. And so that was kind of a bummer for me, because with Riot I expect those carbon fiber inlays to be perfect, and they're not on this knife. So I guess you can't always win, but I wasn't expecting to see a bunch of voids here. They can be fixed. It's something that I can do. I have the capability to fix them, make them disappear, make this carbon fiber look really good like it should look. But it will be extra work, it will take time, and it will be, work. So that was the only really disappointing thing to me, aesthetically wise, with this knife. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the construction of this knife, which is very, very simple. I'm going to roll in a picture here before I talk about it. I'm going to roll in a picture here showing what the inside of the knife looks like when it is disassembled, and how I was able to swap in the multi-row Skiff bearings into this knife. The bearings that it comes with are single row, standard single row caged bearings, the generic bearings that come in most knives. But this knife has a very unusual combination of having a 3/16 inch pivot, and the pocket for the bearing is milled out for a 1/4 inch sized bearing. And because of that unusual size combination, the Skiff bearings with the multi-row bearings fit in here. And this is the only knife out of probably the 30 or 40 knives that I have swapped Skiff bearings into over the past few years. This is the only one that has been able to accept those Skiff multi-row bearings. So what that did for me was took this knife from having 20 balls in the bearings to having 28 balls in the bearings. So we have a much more rigid, rock solid pivot. There is no movement. I'm grabbing this and I'm tweaking. There is no movement at all between the blade and the handle, and it is absolutely awesome with these Skiff multi-row bearings in it. That being said, there is no internal milling on the scales because you have these huge pockets for the inlays milled out already on both sides. So there is a lot of weight reduction already, so no need for internal milling here because you do have those large full-size inlays on the handles. And the construction, basically, you have the pivot screw and the body screw. This one single body screw goes through the clip, it holds the clip on and runs all the way through both scales and threads into the titanium on the opposite side. So just 2 screws to remove and you're into this knife. So very simple construction, which I love. That's great for maintenance, it's great for modifying, it's great for cleaning up and tweaking your knife. So very simple construction, which is awesome. Beyond that, we're going to move on to the action. So when I first got this knife, the detent was a little bit weak. And when I say that, I mean I was able to easily fail the deployment. If I pressed the flipper tab softly, I could fail the deployment. So during my maintenance session of swapping in the Skiff bearings, cleaning everything, and tuning it with my nano oil like I always do with almost every knife, I also went ahead and adjusted the lock bar. Now, I do have a lot of experience adjusting lock bars. I've done the trial and error and learned, over the past couple of years how to adjust lock bars. And so when I did that on this knife, it didn't take a whole lot. I just added a little bit more tension by bending the lock bar, inwards a little bit more. I didn't have to remove the lock bar insert on this particular one because I was not, giving it less tension, I was giving it more tension. So I just bent that lock bar in just a little bit, taking, careful note of exactly, where the lock bar was when I got it and where it was, after I adjusted it. And the result of that adjustment is nothing short of awesome. So now I have this really snappy detent that gives a nice solid thwack when it locks up. And yeah, very pleased with the little lock bar adjustment that I did on here and brought it up to my preferred specifications for the detent stiffness. And it didn't It didn't make the lock bar too stiff. It didn't knock the centering of the blade out of adjustment. It didn't cause any issues at all. And what I ended up with was just a very well-tuned, flipper action. Since this knife only has one deployment method, really, that deployment should be absolutely perfect, for the price range that this knife sits in. You want it to flip really nice, and so I was able to achieve that with this knife, even though it didn't come exactly how I wanted it to. Now it is exactly how I want it to be. So all big pluses there for me. Now, how smooth is this knife on the multi-row bearings with the adjusted detent? Is it still drop shutty? Oh yeah, most definitely. In fact, it can be either hydraulic, where I drop it slowly like so, or if I get it totally vertical, it will just straight guillotine drop like so, just a good guillotine drop, or hydraulic with the double clutch like that, where you drop it, let it stop, and then boom. So closing action on this knife, I'm giving it a solid 10 out of 10. Just a beautiful snappy detent and beautiful drop shutty action. Absolutely love it. And I think that's one of the major draws to this knife that makes it so popular, is the action. And part of the reason that action is so good, even though I adjusted mine and swapped different bearings into it and did what I do to tweak the knife to my preferences, part of the reason that this is so popular is because of the Sharp by Design detent. Now, I don't know if I can maybe get a flashlight on this. I'm going to try. I might blind you guys. Yeah, you can see right there that rather than having a standard ball detent like most knives, the detent on this is actually milled into the lock bar insert. There is a hardened stainless steel lock bar insert in there, and the detent is milled into that insert. And so this is a specific Sharp by Design, patented detent that you won't find on any other knives that are not made by Sharp by Design currently. And the only way previously that you could get this detent was to buy a Sharp by Design Brian Nadeau custom, which is very expensive, and obviously poor guys like me cannot afford to pay for those super expensive custom knives. Maybe one day I will. I would love to own a Brian Nadeau custom, but right now this is as close as I can get. And he was nice enough to allow Riot to use his detent on his design, and to great results, because this is an action that I don't know really how else to define it, other than to say that you have to try it yourself. You can't describe it in words to understand it. It's a very consistent break. When you put the right amount of pressure onto the lock bar and it breaks past that detent, it's a very specific feel that is exclusive to that Brian Nadeau style detent. So that's the big draw for this knife, is obviously the design itself is awesome, and then of course you have that Brian Nadeau detent and this flipper tab, which to me, I know a lot of people, they don't like big flipper tabs, and this is a very big flipper tab, but it works absolutely great on this specific knife, because man, when you get a hold of that thing and flip it, it's flying out. 100% reliable deployment, and it feels comfortable. A lot of people will put their finger fully into the sort of scalloped scoop here that has no jimping and just pull back on it, light switch style. My preference, I'm just grabbing just the tip of that flipper tab. Yes, I did say just the tip. So I'm just grabbing just the tip there and just giving it a little encouragement to open, and it is more than willing to accept that encouragement and fly out beautifully. So phenomenal action, beautiful design, fantastic execution from Riot. Aside from the voids and the marble carbon fiber, everything else on this knife has been absolutely perfect to me, and I want another one. I want this one to carry and use, and I want an all black, the blacked out edition, as some people will say, 187'd out version of this specific Evo Typhoon with the harpoon. I really want the all black version, and I'm sure that they did not make a whole lot of those. I rarely see them posted in the EDC communities on Instagram. It seems like only 1 or 2 people own them, and so, you know, I've begged for people to sell me theirs, and they won't, absolutely won't give them up. But if you know of an all black 2021 Evo Typhoon for sale, for God's sake, please let me know, because I want that one really bad. I want the all black one for show, and I want this one to carry and use. And you know, I feel like the knife is worthy of owning multiples, and that says a lot, because I rarely own multiples of knives. I'm not the kind of guy that buys 12 different colors of the same Spyderco PM2 or whatever, you know. I rarely feel that a knife is worthy of owning multiples, and on this one I want 2 of them at least. All right, guys, I'm gonna get out of here, and you guys have a great rest of your day, and look out for another review coming your way pretty quick here in the next few days. I've got another grail that has landed in my mailbox that I cannot wait to show you guys. Later.